So, hello, do you see my screen?
Yes.
Very good. So, semiotics of culture, what is it? Well, with like most things in culture, it depends. I know that no one likes this kind of formula as an answer to their question, but it really does. Depends on your viewpoint. For example, as Ellie briefly already introduced, this disciplinary perspective in this semiotics of culture is a relatively, let's say, young star in the sky of the humanities, which is a subdomain of semiotics, which studies culture. And its theory and methodology was most notably developed by Juri Lottmann and his colleagues beginning, let's say, from 1960s here in Tartu. But sometimes semiotics of culture is also used as a more general label that denotes broader studies that focus on the meaning-making aspects of culture and in culture. And in that case, of course, the field becomes much blurrier and wider, and we could easily date it back over 2000 years to the works of at least Plato and others who were asking questions about the meaning in human language. And there are other approaches, of course, so the choice is yours. But of course, we can also try to approach this question of what is semiotics of culture from the other side of culture, which would be a logical thing to do with most fields of research when you want to understand what something is about. In the sphere of studies and research, you would ask about its object. But it turns out that in our case, it becomes no easier, because culture is perhaps one of the most complex things you might want to explain to anyone. It's at the same time a sort of global abstraction and most intimate part of our everyday lives, right? So on the one hand, we can talk about something like human culture, just this global phenomenon that distinguishes us as a species from other species that we are cohabiting this planet with, and which is manifested in our rich repertoire of symbolic forms, in the way cultural memory drives our choices and actions in the present day, in our ability for storytelling, etc. So this is the global aspect. But at the same time, let's say the setting where you woke up this morning and what you ate for breakfast or still going to eat, these also constitute as culture. So already defining and delimiting our object is pretty a complex task, let's say, which necessitates frequent switch of perspectives. And luckily, we might say that this disciplinary semiotics of culture provides us with dynamic and innovative means for delimiting our object of study, as well as a variety of descriptive languages for making sense of this object, as opposed to one strict and formal framework. And now, when we try to approach this question of semiotics of culture in specifically Tartuan context, then of course we cannot do without mentioning the name of Juri Lottmann, that Ellie already did. We're celebrating, as you might know, Lottmann's centenary this very year, especially the upcoming weeks, as he was born on February 28th in 1922. And here you've got 3 images mediating a portrait of Lottmann in 3 different media or cultural languages as we conceptualize them here. So in the center, you have his drawing, an autoportrait. There is a sculpture in front of Tartu University Library and there is a photograph. And I also added here a link to a site you might want to check out, especially after next week, where we have gathered all sorts of materials on Lotman's life, work, and his appearances in media. And it's also in English, Estonian, and Russian. So Lotman in Tartu, it was actually Lotman founding the Tartu Moscow School of Semiotics was a relatively unexpected occurrence that, again, depending on your perspective, was unfortunate and very fortunate at the same time. Lotman was transferred from St. Petersburg and Leningrad then to Tartu because he couldn't get an academic position due to his origins. So he was transferred to Tartu, a relative periphery back then. But Tartu turned out to be a town that he fell in love with and spent the rest of his life here. And he and his circle started developing this theory of semiotics of culture, as we said, around 1960s, first mostly based on literary texts, but later also expanded as formats in media, cultural expression, and later discovered also some general operating mechanisms of culture. And Lotman's legacy, combined with the work of his students in developing it in very many different directions, as Nelly already told you, and Deet will tell you in a minute, not only in direction of semiotics of culture, but others. And these two combined, the legacy and developing it, has rendered Tartu indeed one of the most important centers of semiotics worldwide. And what this means for us in this context is perhaps that this brings along a very active and lively life of conferences and seminars and other types of events that our students can all take part in. And perhaps the strong position of semiotics and in general, and semiotics of culture equally, is very much dependent on our times right now, which could be, let's say, described by on the one hand, information overload and this feeling of unpredictability. So on the one hand, we have access, unprecedented access to all sorts of information about the world, but at the same time, we still feel that it's more difficult than ever to explain what's going on and what might come in the future. Also, we are becoming more and more aware of the complex nature of the problems in our surrounding world, that is, in our interconnected world. To bring a very simple example, let's take this looming climate catastrophe. It's clear now that it's not only a problem of natural world that deserves the attention of natural scientists only, but is at least equally a problem of culture and value systems. So we might say that this excess of carbon emissions, excessive carbon dioxide emissions, and loss of biodiversity have a clear dimension or clear cultural semiotic dimension to them. And Uri Lotman's approach, his holistic approach to semiotic systems, has been recognized as a valuable partner in this dialogues, or having the potential of really contributing to the related debates. And when we get more specifically to our program here in Tartu, that Yaeli will tell you more in detail, but what I wanted to bring out is just perhaps that we have a good balance of these theoretical subjects. So we have courses on the historical, methodological, and theoretical background of semiotics of culture, but we also have courses that explain the ways that this knowledge can be put into action and used as a problem-solving tool. And for a cultural semiotic example, for example, in those more theoretical courses, we are asking questions such as what are the mechanisms of creating new meanings? How does change happen in culture, and can it be directed somehow? Why do boundaries function as hotspots of meaning making? How translations shape culture, and how memory shapes innovation? What is the role of self-description in culture? And why the ability for self-description and having different means or different languages for making sense of oneself is one of the key elements of, or key attributes that can make cultures thrive. So these are just some random questions that we will discuss to give you an overview. And what I'd perhaps like to point out as well, finally, is that we very much encourage students to write their thesis, but also smaller coursework on topics that particularly interests themselves, which means that we have a very wide variety of backgrounds of students. So just an example, again, from the cultural semiotic perspective, last year, we had thesis defended on K-pop, on wearable digital technology, on autobiographical writing from 1980s, on ethnographic films, etc., etc. So bring along your own field or object of interest. Yes, so in sum, I guess the essence of semiotics of culture is this semiotic and cultural mediation of the world around us, and understanding the mechanisms of this mediation makes both researching culture as well as experiencing the culture very interesting. So you're welcome to Tartu. That's all from my side, and of course I will be happy to answer all of your questions if you happen to have any.